Welcome to Ancient Worlds, where every forgotten ruin tells a story, and every unearthed artifact holds a whisper from a deep, systemic failure. You stand today in the vast, fertile expanse of the American bottom, gazing upon the low, weathered shapes of the Cahokia Mountains. The humid air is heavy, and you immediately feel the presence of the Mississippi River, which, though distant now, is the lifeblood and, ultimately, the greatest threat to this lost metropolis. This place, at its peak around 1050 CE, was home to at least 20,000 people, a massive urban center whose primary structure, Monk's Mound, dwarfed the bases of the Egyptian pyramids. Ever wonder what it truly felt like to stand in the shadow of a living civilization built entirely on fragile complexity? The mystery of Cahokia is not that it vanished, but how it vanished. Our conventional history often simplifies such collapses to a single, clean cause, a great war, or a simple drought. The truth we pursue in the complex collapse archive is far more unsettling. Cahokia was murdered by 1,000 small cuts, a perfect storm of internal political fragility meeting an external, escalating environmental disaster. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find the journey we're about to take is a valuable one. Invite viewers to share where they are watching from and which lost civilization fascinates them the most. Now, let's journey back in time and uncover the story of a lost world. You realize, as you walk across the leveled Grand Plaza, that every aspect of this incredible city, its massive scale, its population density, its sheer existence, was entirely dependent on the specific, narrow conditions of the Mississippi River floodplain. The river was their partner, providing the annual sediment that replenished the soil, creating the most fertile corn-growing region in North America. Cahokia's success was literally built on the assumption of a moderate, predictable river cycle. This dependence forged a powerful political thesis. The elite leaders, residing atop the towering Monk's Mound, maintained their power by successfully negotiating this critical human environmental contract. They guaranteed the harvests. The people guaranteed their loyalty. This investigation is about the deadly timing of the river's betrayal and how an exogenous shock, the Great Flood, amplified the pre-existing internal stressors, political inequality, until the only possible outcome was the slow, silent process of de-urbanization. The city's astonishing architectural feats and political centralization, which made it the dominant force in the Mississippian world, simultaneously made it the most rigid and vulnerable. It could not adapt, it could only break. We must now examine the peak of that control, understanding how the elite used science and spectacle to convince their thousands of subjects that the system of complexity was stable. The stability of Cahokia rested entirely on its mastery of its environment, a mastery visibly expressed in its architecture. You walk toward the center of the Grand Plaza, and you see the organized genius that defined the apex system. The Grand Plaza itself was not natural. It was meticulously leveled and resurfaced with tons of imported clay, creating a massive, dedicated ceremonial space. The uniformity speaks to a singular, powerful authority capable of mobilizing thousands of laborers across vast distances. The very essence of the elite's power was their perceived ability to synchronize human endeavor with the cosmic order. Their greatest scientific achievement, and therefore their greatest political asset, was the Woodhenge. You stand now at the reconstructed site. Imagine the colossal timber circles, massive cedar and oak posts strategically placed to align perfectly with the sunrise on the solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't merely religious art. This was a crucial piece of administrative technology. By accurately predicting the seasons and the agricultural calendar, The elite could dictate planting, harvesting, and, most importantly, the timing of ceremonial tributes. They literally controlled the rhythm of life on the floodplain. This centralized, successful control over the environment allowed the city to flourish. The massive scale of the Monk's Mound, built in those 14 labor-intensive phases, was the physical manifestation of this controlled bounty. The predictable, moderate river flows ensured rich harvests, and the accurate calendar ensured maximal yield. The citizens below, seeing the massive architecture and the precise astronomical alignments, had every reason to believe that the ruling class, the ones living atop those mounds and directing the ritual at the Woodhenge, held the keys to their prosperity. However, this reliance on precise, fixed knowledge introduced profound vulnerability.
The west side.
The Cahokian system,
Now,
built on the premise of a predictable environment, could not conceive of environmental chaos. Their specialized administrative structure, their stratified society, and their monumental architecture were all adapted to a specific, narrow range of climate and river behavior. They were masters of the predictable flood. But what happens when the very foundations of your predictable world, the very water that gives you life, turns hostile and erratic? You realize that the technological and ceremonial achievement of the Woodhenge, designed for perfect synchronization, would become utterly worthless the moment nature decided to ignore the calendar. The seeds of the city's destruction were sown in the very clay of its perfect, rigid design. The rigidity of the apex system created the internal stressors that were quietly sapping Cahokia's strength even before the river turned chaotic. You move from the Woodhenge back towards the Grand Plaza, and you see the clear, physical sign of a society losing faith in itself, the Palisade. This massive, towering defensive wall, constructed from millions of logs, did not exist during the city's peak growth period. It was erected later, repeatedly rebuilt, encircling the central ceremonial core and the elite residences. This is the archaeological signature of a political fracture. The wall was not primarily built to keep external enemies out, though it served that purpose, but to maintain social stratification and contain the city's own discontented population. The ruling class was walling itself off from the commoners, a clear sign that the political costs of maintaining complexity had become too high. The elite were no longer sustained by the willing awe of their people, but by structural coercion. The political system was hemorrhaging energy. Imagine the massive effort, the labor, and the timber resources required to constantly maintain a wooden wall around a city of this size. This effort was a drain on the agricultural production that Tainter's theory identifies as a classic sign of internal fault lines. Every hour spent felling trees for the Palisade was an hour not spent tending the cornfields or repairing the irrigation ditches. The system was eating its own tail.
It's almost perfectly
The rising
preserved.
inequality was physically
incredible.
manifest.
Make sure we
You
photograph.
can see the difference in the graves. The lavish burial of the elite near the mounds versus the sparse, simple burials of the periphery. The citizens outside the Palisade were increasingly paying the heavy cost of the centralized system, the mandatory labor, the tribute, the defense levy, but were receiving diminishing returns in return. Their leaders, insulated by massive earthen mounds and stout wooden walls, appeared to be failing in their fundamental promise: security and prosperity. The elite needed an unwavering belief system to justify their existence, but the people's loyalty was being tested by the relentless demands of the central complex. This high degree of centralization made the society brittle. It lacked the ability to decentralize or simplify its social structure without causing a cascade failure. The Palisade became the last, desperate act of a political system trying to force compliance from a population whose loyalty was quietly migrating away. The internal fuse was lit. It only awaited the external spark of the river to ignite the collapse. The internal decay we have traced, the political strain, the waste of resources on the Palisade, and the rising resentment brings us directly back to Tainter's iron wall. You observe the city at its architectural peak, yet fundamentally strained. This is the moment the cost of complexity began to eclipse the benefit it provided. Think back to the 14 construction phases of Monk's Mound. At Phase 5, the mound's height provided immense political legitimacy, ritual power, and trade dominance. The cost of labor was easily offset by the benefit of centralized security and astronomical accuracy, the Woodhenge. But by Phase 14, the cost had skyrocketed. The older clay needed constant repair to prevent slumping. The massive palisade required perpetual logging and reconstruction. And the administrative bureaucracy needed to organize 20,000 citizens had ballooned. This entire burden fell disproportionately on the common farmers outside the walls. This is the tyranny of the apex system. The elite must always maintain and justify their unique status, often through monumental projects. But those projects require more and more maintenance, drawing labor away from subsistence tasks. The Cahokian farmer, already paying tribute, was now forced to spend days logging for the palisade or compacting clay, just to keep the city from literally falling apart. The marginal return for that extra basket of clay or that extra log was now negligible for the farmer, even though the elite demanded it to maintain their power. It's a curious thing, this ancient form of municipal debt. The result of this escalating cost was the increasing brittleness of the society. Cahokia, rigid, centralized, and deeply indebted to its own massive infrastructure, had almost no flexible social capital left. It was running on fumes, politically and economically. It could handle a minor drought or a small border skirmish, events that simpler, decentralized societies could easily absorb. But it could not handle any major, prolonged exogenous shock. All the resources that should have been put into diversifying crop resilience or building higher flood defenses were instead locked up in maintaining the political theater of the central city. You recognize the pattern. The monumental success of Cahokia, its sheer size, its dense population, its beautiful symmetry, was also its greatest liability. Its political fragility was masked by its architectural spectacle, but the growing cost was forcing people to ask a simple, dangerous question. Is the immense sacrifice required to maintain the complexity of this capital truly worth the diminishing returns we receive? This internal question was about to be answered brutally by the natural world. The inevitable blow came from the very source of Cahokia's wealth, the Mississippi River. This is where the abstract concept of internal stress met the devastating reality of the exogenous shock. You transition from looking at the palisade and the mounds to visualizing the vast, dark water of the river itself. For centuries, the Cahokians had mastered the predictable flooding, utilizing the rich sediment for their vast
Pre-collapse layers show
cornfields.
stable sedimentation,
But
the
the
transition at
archaeological
500
evidence from
CE
sediment
is
cores,
abrupt, leading into this
the
turbulent
detective work of paleoclimatologists, reveals a terrifying shift starting around 1200 CE. The cores, extracted deep beneath the floodplain, show a marked change in deposition patterns. The river cycles shifted from moderate, predictable flows to frequent, catastrophic, high-magnitude floods. These weren't the gentle, enriching floods of the past. These were violent, unpredictable inundations that destroyed entire seasons of crops, scoured valuable topsoil, and destabilized the infrastructure of the surrounding satellite communities. Imagine the devastating psychological and practical impact on the 20,000 citizens. The Woodhenge, The elaborate ritual complex that promised stability and accurate seasonal timing suddenly became a cruel joke.
Hear our plea.
The elite, who claimed
Turn
cosmic
back the
insight
wind.
and control over the seasons, could offer no defense against the increasingly chaotic river. Their entire political and religious platform, built on the promise of agricultural security, was swept away by the churning water. This is the ultimate test of the centralized system. Had the community been decentralized, smaller groups could have retreated to higher ground, switched to different crops, or relied on more flexible trade networks. But Cahokia was locked into its monumental infrastructure and its single crop dependence. All of its complexity, its massive population, its high specialization, made it acutely vulnerable to the one thing it could not control: unpredictable water. It's a powerful lesson in how perfect planning can lead to perfect failure. The flood event acted as a catalytic multiplier, instantly accelerating the internal decay. The citizens already questioning the high cost of the Palisade and the demands of the elite now had undeniable proof that the central authority was fundamentally broken. The river, the ultimate symbol of their wealth and power, had publicly betrayed the ruling class, leaving the population hungry and disillusioned. The exogenous shock had removed the last pillar of the system's legitimacy. The psychological and political impact of the floods was overwhelming. But the detective work continues. We must now look beyond the sheer physical destruction to understand the loss of faith that sealed Cahokia's fate. The evidence strategy shifts from the river sediment to the crumbling structures themselves, revealing a civilization that suddenly lost its sense of purpose and stability. First, consider the Woodhenge. Its entire function was rooted in precision and prediction. Once the river became chaotic, inundating fields on unpredictable timelines, the exact science of the solar alignments became irrelevant. The priests and leaders who controlled the calendar, the timekeepers, could no longer deliver usable agricultural advice. The people had proof that the elite's fundamental contract with the cosmos had been nullified by the river's changing temperament. Furthermore, the flood cycles provided undeniable evidence of the elite's incompetence in resource allocation. The people could see the massive, continuous labor being spent to rebuild the non-essential Palisade, a purely political and defensive structure, while simultaneously, essential infrastructure like higher flood berms or diversified planting strategies were neglected. The elite chose to invest in control rather than resilience. The result was the catastrophic erosion of political legitimacy. The failure was amplified by the city's complex, hierarchical nature. In a simpler, decentralized village, if one field floods, you adapt. In Cahokia, the entire centralized food mechanism failed simultaneously. The people realized the system, once a source of strength, was now a dangerous liability, demanding resources to maintain itself while actively failing to sustain basic life. This realization, this profound intellectual loss of faith, is the point of no return. The flood provided the perfect justification for the commoners to finally reject the oppressive burden of complexity. They realized they could achieve better, safer returns by simply abandoning the rigid, high-cost system and seeking simplicity. The chaos of the river gave them the freedom to vote with their feet, a silent revolution rooted in ecological necessity. This wholesale rejection of the central authority marked the beginning of the end. The cumulative effect of the failures, the political stress from the Palisade, the environmental chaos from the floods, and the loss of faith in the calendrical elite, all converged into the final stage of Cahokia's history, the Great Exodus. This was the multi-century process of de-urbanization. You are witnessing the ultimate consequence of prioritizing complexity over resilience. The people didn't need a formal announcement of collapse. They simply acted on the evidence. Why stay in a rigid, complex, and high-cost urban center where the elite could no longer guarantee the harvest? The river was unpredictable, and the immense labor demands only intensified. The cost-benefit analysis, once overwhelmingly in favor of the metropolis, had flipped completely. The solution for the populace was profound simplification. They didn't flee to another massive city. They returned to a localized, flexible, and lower-risk way of life. They moved to smaller, self-sufficient communities upstream or downstream, shedding the oppressive administrative burden and ceremonial costs of the center. The city was not sacked or destroyed in fire. It was silently, rationally abandoned. The massive infrastructure became worthless the moment the people ceased to believe in the system that demanded its upkeep. By the early 14th century, the great metropolis of 20,000 was reduced to a ghost town, leaving only the silent earthen monuments behind. The Monk's Mound, the symbol of their unparalleled unity, was left to the elements. Its clay terraces slowly slumping without the constant human labor required to maintain its form. This legacy of de-urbanization offers a chilling, essential warning for our modern world. Cahokia teaches us that systemic failure is multifactorial. Its doom was not sealed by a single drought, but by the deadly interaction between internal stressors, unsustainable complexity, and an exogenous shock, a climate cycle change, hitting a system with zero redundancy. When all resources are poured into maintaining a rigid, centralized structure, the capacity to adapt disappears. Their complexity was their pride, and ultimately, their grave. You walk away from the silent mounds, carrying the knowledge that true strength lies not in monumentality, but in resilience, redundancy, and flexibility.